If you want to understand Russia through a map, you'll get lost. If you try to understand Russia through slogans, you'll get even more lost. But if you step into a Russian kitchen on a long winter night where steam rises from a kettle, where a spoon taps the rim of a faceted glass with a dry, cold sound, you'll notice something that appears the moment the conversation reaches its deepest point: a bottle of vodka. Not as a drink for fun, but as evidence of history, a ritual of endurance, and sometimes a way for people to remind themselves that they are still standing. The question of why vodka became a symbol of the Russian spirit is not about alcohol content. It's about how vodka has walked alongside the state, war, poverty, pride, and collective trauma for centuries, like an invisible thread binding people together in a land so vast that even loneliness seems to have a surface area. Start with a scene that looks small: a wooden house in the countryside, snow piled high outside the porch, a simple table inside. The host doesn't ask whether you drink, they pour. Not because they want to pressure you, but because in Russian culture, there are moments when words are not enough. When you need to confirm a relationship, when you want to turn a stranger into one of us, when you're saying goodbye, celebrating something rare, or escorting someone into the unknown, vodka enters as a stamp on the moment. A small shot, a short toast, and then a few seconds of silence. For an American or European viewer, the striking part is not the drinking, but the way the ritual gives way to time. Vodka here isn't entertainment. It's a button that shifts the conversation from the surface down to the bedrock. But why vodka rather than wine as in France, beer as in Germany, or whiskey as in Scotland? The answer lies in how Russia formed as a state and as a society. For centuries, Russia has been harsh in a very literal sense. Winters are long, growing seasons are short, distances between communities are vast, and survival often depends on storage and mutual support. Lighter fermented drinks existed, but they belonged to ordinary rhythms. Strong distilled spirits, clear, sharp, stable, easy to preserve and transport, easy to standardize, fit an expanding empire and a governing system that wanted control over taxes, the military, and social order. One detail matters: vodka wasn't only a cultural product, it became a fiscal instrument of the state. When a government needs steady revenue, it seeks something measurable, controllable, and reliably in demand. Alcohol taxes and state control over distribution could provide exactly that. This created a strange loop. The state relied on vodka to fund the apparatus. The apparatus shaped how vodka entered daily life. Daily life came to treat vodka as a part of reality itself. In many places, alcohol is a story of family, village, and religion. In Russia, strong spirits also became a story of the treasury and power. When something passes through the dinner table and the state budget, it stops being a drink. It becomes social infrastructure. Picture Imperial Russia, a massive territory where news traveled slowly, winter could cut roads for months, and people leaned on their communities to survive. In such a world, ritual isn't only belief. It's a mechanism of cohesion. Vodka slowly became the material of ritual. It appears at weddings to confirm the alliance between families. It appears at funerals as a way of acknowledging grief and carrying it together. It enters business meetings as an unspoken test. Is this person trustworthy, willing to share risk, willing to go to the bottom of the glass in the symbolic sense of going to the end of a commitment? Vodka functions as a social language without words. It softens distance and hardens belonging. Yet calling vodka a symbol of unbreakable spirit doesn't mean it's only connected to joy. The darker layer is that vodka also helped people endure what they could not change. When life is bent by war, deprivation, and distant orders, people tend to reach for two things: meaning and numbness. In Russia, meaning might come from faith, community, or national pride. Numbness, in many periods, came through vodka. This is where the symbol becomes heavy. Vodka can be both a bridge between people and a thick blanket pulled over the coldest parts of reality. You see this most clearly in times when Russia was pushed to its limits. Some of the most haunting images of the 20th century are of cities under siege, armies moving through snow, factories running in darkness, families waiting for news in cramped apartments. In such conditions, spirit isn't an abstract idea, it's what gets you out of bed tomorrow. Russia has a distinct tradition of valuing endurance not as passive submission, but as an inner victory over circumstance. In countless Russian stories, from literature to everyday life, the hero doesn't necessarily defeat an enemy through force, but through the ability to keep going when everything says you should collapse. Vodka, in that context, is given a symbolic role, a small shot to hold the flame, to warm your hands, to mark the fact that you are still here. A well-known element in Soviet memory is the frontline vodka ration during World War II, often remembered as 100 grams. Details varied by time and unit, but the meaning matters. The state acknowledged fear and exhaustion, and vodka became a tool both physiological and psychological. In a war where death could come from cold, hunger, shelling, and disease, vodka offered a temporary easing of the present. It also created a sense of brotherhood, pour, toast, silence, together. When a ritual repeats on the edge of life and death, it becomes a symbol of survival. What's striking is that vodka isn't mythologized the way wine is in the Mediterranean, where people speak of terroir, grapes, barrel aging, and complexity. Vodka, in its ideal form, almost has no flavor. It is clear, straight, neutral. It tells fewer stories through taste and more through effect and ritual. And that neutrality helps vodka become a symbol of will. When you drink something that doesn't ask to be described or admired, the act itself becomes the message. This is not play, this is affirmation. For many Russians, vodka represents a simplification of life. Everything may be complicated, but some moments require a single, direct gesture to say, "We understand each other." From a sociological view, vodka acts like communal glue in a high uncertainty environment. When laws shift, economies swing, and political shocks arrive in waves, people need stable rituals to cling to. In societies with long-standing, consistent religious life, faith rituals often fill that role. In societies with strong welfare systems, institutions can create a baseline sense of safety. Russia's historical experience for many, however, has been turbulence, revolutions, wars, collectivization, crises, collapse, reform. Against that backdrop, everyday rituals, meals, short toasts, vodka can become a small system that feels more reliable than distant grand structures. It's a simple, unspoken sentence: whatever tomorrow brings, tonight we are still here. We pour a shot. We look at each other like people who have already walked through a long road together. But if we stop at warmth and togetherness, we miss a deeper layer. Vodka also reflects Russia's unusual relationship between the individual and power. In many eras, Russians lived in a structure where major decisions came from far away, and ordinary people had little influence. When the distance between citizens and central authority is large, people often develop to opposite responses: acceptance or retreat into private life. Vodka frequently sits inside the second response. It isn't rebellion, but a kind of temporary withdrawal. And when millions practice that small withdrawal, vodka becomes associated with survival in silence. That is Russian unbreakability, not always public defiance, but stamina in kitchens, in small rooms, in stories passed across generations. At this point, it's important to be direct, especially for American and European audiences. Vodka as a symbol doesn't mean it's harmless or something to romanticize. Russia has paid heavy costs for a culture of strong drinking, public health, life expectancy, domestic violence, workplace accidents. Different governments have, at times, exploited alcohol and then tried to control it, creating a persistent contradiction. When money and stability are needed, supply opens. When society starts to collapse, restrictions tighten. This history shows that vodka is not merely a personal choice. It is a force within the system, sometimes encouraged, sometimes suppressed, always present in the tug-of-war between state interests and human lives. That contradiction becomes especially visible in Soviet-era anti-alcohol campaigns, particularly during the reform years, when leaders attempted to reduce consumption by cutting supply and tightening sales. For many families, it was a period of both hope and frustration. Hope, because they wanted a healthier society. Frustration, because habits were deeply rooted, and when the thing people used to numb pain was suddenly taken away, the psychological void became impossible to ignore. Responses like illegal distilling, hoarding, and substitution revealed that vodka wasn't only a commodity, it had become a coping mechanism. When that mechanism is broken abruptly, society is forced to face what vodka had been covering: stress, anxiety, disorientation. After the Soviet Union collapsed, Russia entered a decade that many describe as a whirlwind. Currency lost value, ownership flipped overnight, rules changed, and a sense of no one is responsible spread. In transition periods like that, vodka returned to its familiar role, both comforting and frightening, cheap, accessible, something you could afford even when you couldn't afford the future. It appeared in new business deals, in the parties of those who rose quickly, and in rooms where the unemployed stared at tomorrow with no plan. Vodka reflected to Russia's at once, a Russia trying to climb and a Russia being left behind. When a symbol can stand at both extremes of society, it becomes national in the most ruthless way. It belongs to everyone, even if not everyone is proud of it. So where is Unbreakable spirit in this story? It lies in vodka's connection to a certain attitude toward life, looking straight at reality without sugarcoating, and still finding a way to continue. Russian culture carries a kind of deep, slow sadness, part pessimism, part poetry that is notoriously hard to translate. In Russian literature, the greatest pages are often not about victory, but about dignified endurance, people crushed by history who still keep their core intact. Vodka enters as a prop of that emotional world. When people raise a glass, they're not only celebrating. They are toasting strength, they are toasting the dead. They are toasting tomorrow's hardship, and sometimes they are toasting one very simple thing: there are still friends around this table. Psychologically, vodka can also work like a state switch in Russian social life. Russians are often described as reserved, less small talk, fewer social smiles. But that surface comes from a culture that values sincerity over pleasantness. In that pattern, vodka becomes a ritual permission slip to reach truth more quickly. A short toast, a small shot, and people begin to say what they normally don't. Outsiders sometimes interpret this as vodka unlocking the Russian soul. On a deeper level, it reflects a society where open emotional exposure was not always safe or encouraged, especially in periods when words could bring trouble. When honesty is pushed downward, people find another channel for release. Vodka became that channel, socially accepted, widely available, and culturally legible. Vodka also temporarily flattens hierarchy. At a vodka table, the distance between a professor and a factory worker, between rich and poor, can shrink for a few minutes. Not because alcohol dissolves class, but because the ritual creates a shared rule: pour, toast, drink. In a society shaped by sharp stratification and repeated upheaval, that temporary equality has enormous appeal. It offers the sense that, at least in this room, at least for a moment, we face each other as people, not as roles. But symbols always have a price. When vodka becomes the way to prove belonging or toughness, it can turn into pressure. In many ordinary stories, people drink not because they want to, but because they don't want to fall out of the circle. And here, Unbreakable can slide into stubborn enduring by swallowing, rather than seeking help. This is the tragedy inside the symbol. A thing that represents resilience can also reinforce habits that make people weaker. Understanding this helps Western audiences avoid the simplistic lens of Russians drink vodka because it's cold or because they just like it. Vodka is a mirror. It reflects history, institutions, and collective psychology. There is one more layer that gives vodka its unbreakable color: the way it is wrapped into the national narrative. Russia is a country deeply conscious of what it has endured to survive: invasions, sacrifice, loss, victory, collapse, and return. Those experiences are told as a long river of struggle. In that river, vodka appears as an everyday symbol, close, tangible, not lofty, but persistent. It's something you can touch while listening to stories too large to hold. It turns history into an object you can place on a table. It makes the Russian spirit less abstract and more like a ritual you can witness. That may be why, for many Russians, vodka isn't just a national drink, it's a kind of identity relic. When you pour vodka in a small apartment, you do what your grandparents did. When you raise a glass, you repeat a gesture repeated by soldiers, workers, farmers, and intellectuals in moments when they had nothing to hold onto but one another. And the fact that a small action can stretch across generations creates the feeling of unbreakability. Unbreakability isn't always heroism on a battlefield. Sometimes it is surviving winter, scarcity, grief, reinvention, and still having a ritual that says you have not been completely bent. From the outside, vodka looks like a symbol of strength. In truth, it is a symbol of managed fragility. It admits that people sometimes cannot endure without help, and society invented a way to endure together. It says pain is real, and we need a ritual to pass through it. It also reminds us that a nation can learn to turn something dangerous into something meaningful even when the costs are high. So if there is one simple answer for American and European audiences, it might be this: vodka became a symbol of Russia's unbreakable spirit, not because it makes people stronger, but because it appears exactly where they feel weakest. It stands between people and the cold weight of history, between the individual and a country too vast, between loneliness and the need to belong. It is the language of companionship in a culture that respects endurance. And precisely because it is that language, vodka carries both the light and the shadow of Russia. Now return to that winter kitchen. The bottle on the table isn't an invitation to escape life. It is a way of framing a moment. We have lived through many things, and we are still able to sit here together. That is the Russian kind of unbreakability: no performance, no slogans, just existence, sharing, and continuing. When you see it that way, vodka stops being a cultural stereotype. It becomes a story about people, how a society learns to survive cycles of harshness, and how a small ritual can carry the weight of a very large history.